The blueberry cake donut was, as always, absolute perfection. Lance Everett leaned back in his chair at Happy Donut and watched Juliet take her first bite. That split second before the flavor registered, her eyes going soft, her shoulders dropping just slightly, the rest of the world temporarily ceasing to exist, was, he had decided, one of his favorite things. She pressed a napkin to the corner of her mouth, satisfied.
Still the best thing on earth.
Lance grinned.
I keep telling you, science has yet to improve on the blueberry cake donut.
Coming from a man who can bend time, that is either the most reassuring or the most disappointing thing I've ever heard.
He laughed, reaching across the table to steal a piece of her donut. She slapped his hand away without looking up, a reflex so practiced it required no thought. Across the restaurant, Sam refilled a customer's coffee and threw Lance a knowing look. Some things never changed. That was precisely what Lance loved about Friday afternoons. It had been 8 months since the events that had turned his world inside out. 8 months since Aziz had been led away in handcuffs on the Stanford campus, since Commander Stratford had clapped him on the shoulder with that quiet soldier's nod that said more than words ever could. 8 months of slowly, carefully exhaling, of rediscovering what normal felt like. Normal felt like this. Juliet across from him, her red hair catching the afternoon light, engagement pictures spread between their coffee cups, Sam humming something tuneless behind the counter. Juliet slid a photograph toward him.
Okay, this one. Final answer.
Lance picked it up and looked at it properly this time. Not the way he'd been looking at photographs for 3 weeks, quickly, comparatively, ranking them against each other like data points. He looked at it the way you look at something you want to remember. The two of them at Half Moon Bay, 6 months ago. Wind pulling at Juliet's hair so that it crossed her face in a red streak, and she hadn't fixed it because she'd been laughing too hard at something Lance had said. He couldn't remember what, only that it had been one of those afternoons where everything seemed funny, and the light was the specific gold of late October, and they'd stayed on the bluff until the sun was completely gone, and the cold finally drove them back to the car. He was looking at her in the photo, rather than at the camera. He looked, he thought now, like a man who had recently discovered something he hadn't known he'd been missing, and was still slightly stunned by the fact of it. He looked happy in it, not performed happy, genuinely, unguardedly, slightly disbelievingly happy.
Done. That's the one.
Juliet beamed.
See? Decision-making doesn't have to be complicated.
Tell that to the 17 other photos you've had me rank over the past 3 weeks.
She pointed her fork at him.
Narrowing down is a process, Lance.
He smiled and said nothing, because she was right. And also because he could have sat here doing exactly this, arguing cheerfully about nothing over donuts for the rest of his life without complaint. He had learned not to take ordinary moments for granted. Ordinary moments, he now understood, were the whole point. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. Dean Ehrlich. Juliet noticed his expression shift.
Work?
Dean's office.
He frowned slightly. It was a Friday afternoon. Ehrlich was not a Friday afternoon caller.
Give me 1 minute.
He stepped to the quieter end of the restaurant, near the door where the afternoon foot traffic thinned out.
Dr. Ehrlich, good afternoon.
The dean's voice carried that particular warmth he reserved for conversations that preceded a request. Lance had learned to recognize it over the years.
Lance, sorry to interrupt your weekend. Do you have a moment?
Of course.
Good. I'll get straight to it. I had lunch yesterday with a man named Dorian Ashford Nouri. You may have heard the name.
Lance had. Everyone had. Nouri's name appeared in financial headlines the way weather appeared in forecasts. Constantly, and with significant implications for everyone. He was the kind of man whose quarterly earnings calls moved stock markets, whose acquisitions reshaped entire industries before the ink dried.
I know who he is.
He's expressed a very serious interest in funding a research initiative. Anti-aging, longevity science, disease prevention, the full scope. He's assembled a remarkable team, apparently. World-class physicians, biologists, geneticists. He wants a dedicated facility, away from distractions, where the brightest minds can work without interruption. He asked specifically about you, Lance.
Me. I'm a quantum physicist.
I said as much. He told me his team has already recommended you independently. Apparently, several of the physicians involved believe your work on temporal mechanics has direct applications to cellular aging. Something about your research on energy states and biological half-lives. I'll be honest with you, Lance, the specifics were above my pay grade. But he was very clear. He'd like to meet you. Just a conversation.
Lance leaned against the wall and looked back at Juliet through the window of the restaurant. She was studying the photographs again, holding one up to the light with a focused expression that made him smile in spite of himself.
A conversation.
He's offering substantial research funding, not just for this project, for whatever you want to pursue afterward. No strings, he said. He just wants an hour of your time.
Lance was quiet for a moment. Donor calls came with the territory, the careful dance between curiosity and capital, handshakes that usually amounted to nothing. But something about this one pricked at the back of his mind in a way he couldn't quite name. Not the funding, the specificity. Nouri hadn't just offered money, he'd named Lance. He'd apparently been briefed on Lance's work in enough detail to make a coherent scientific argument for his inclusion.
When does he want to meet?
He's in San Francisco next Thursday. He suggested dinner. His treat, naturally. The man does not appear to do anything modestly.
Lance glanced once more at Juliet through the glass. She had set the photograph down. She was watching him now. Not with alarm, not with curiosity exactly, but with the particular stillness of someone who had read the room and was waiting to see what the room said next.
I'll meet with him. Just the one conversation.
Wonderful. I'll have his office reach out to confirm the details. Thank you, Lance. I think this could be a remarkable opportunity.
Lance thanked him and hung up. He stood for a moment with the phone in his hand, not moving. Then he shook his head slightly, tucked the phone in his pocket, and walked back to the table. Juliet raised an eyebrow.
Dean Ehrlich wants me to have dinner with a billionaire.
Is that a normal Thursday or an unusual one?
Somewhere in between. A man named Dorian Nouri. Apparently, he's funding some kind of longevity research. His team asked for me specifically.
As in, the Dorian Nouri? The man who owns approximately half the world?
The other half is still available, I'm told.
She gave him a look.
And you said yes?
I said I'd have dinner. One conversation. Could be nothing.
Juliet studied him for a moment, in that quiet, precise way she had, like she was taking his temperature without a thermometer. Then she picked up her donut and took another bite.
Could be nothing.
But her voice carried the same small note of reservation that his own chest did. Sam appeared at their table, coffee pot in hand, and refilled their cups without being asked. Outside the window, the afternoon moved along at its usual Friday pace. Students crossed the street with backpacks. A dog investigated a fire hydrant with tremendous thoroughness. The world was ordinary and unhurried, and full of small, unremarkable things. Lance wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and told himself that was exactly what this was going to be. Ordinary. Unremarkable. He almost believed it. Thursday arrived with the particular self-importance of occasions that have been anticipated too long. The restaurant Dorian Nouri had chosen occupied the top floor of a hotel in San Francisco that Lance had walked past 100 times without ever considering entering. The kind of establishment that didn't display its prices because the prices were not the point. The maitre d' greeted Lance by name before he had reached the podium. Impressive and faintly unsettling. He was escorted to a corner table with a view of the bay that turned the water into hammered copper in the evening light. Dorian Ashford Nouri was already seated, and the first thing Lance noticed was that the man was entirely still. Not the stillness of someone waiting, the stillness of someone who had long ago stopped needing to fill silence with movement. He sat the way very few people sat anymore, completely present, as though the room had arranged itself around him, rather than the other way around. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that required no tie to communicate authority. His face bore the architecture of someone who had been striking in youth and had aged into something more interesting than handsome. Silver hair, cut precisely. Hands that were still steady when he rose to greet Lance, though Lance noticed, because he was a scientist and noticing was his occupation, that the movement cost him something small. A fraction of effort that wasn't quite natural. Dorian's voice was low and deliberate, the accent a cultivated amalgam that belonged to no single country.
Dr. Everett, thank you for making time.
Of course. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Nouri.
Dorian, please. I dislike formality at dinner. It interferes with the food.
Lance sat. A server materialized with water and a menu entirely free of prices. Nouri was already drinking sparkling water. No wine, no cocktail.
I appreciate you agreeing to meet. I know your time is valuable.
Dean Ehrlich speaks very highly of you. He made it difficult to say no.
Something moved briefly across Nouri's face. Amusement, perhaps, or the memory of it.
Ehrlich is a good man. We've known each other a long time. Let me not waste your evening with small talk, Dr. Everett. I find it exhausting, and I suspect you do too.
I appreciate that.
Nouri looked at him directly. His eyes were extraordinarily alert. Whatever his body was doing, his mind was operating at full capacity, fully present, fully sharp.
Tell me something, Dr. Everett. How many people died of age-related disease last year?
Globally? Somewhere in the range of 40 million.
41,300,000, give or take. Cancer, heart failure, neurodegeneration, organ collapse. The catalog is long, and it is fundamentally a catalog of the same root problem: the human body aging faster than our ability to stop it. Now, how much of the world's research capital was directed at genuinely understanding the mechanisms of cellular aging last year, rather than treating its symptoms after the fact?
Lance said nothing. He knew where this was going and found, to his mild irritation, that he had no satisfying counter-argument ready.
A fraction, a rounding error. Because the money follows the treatments, and the treatments follow the diagnoses. And by the time there is a diagnosis, the problem is already decades old. We are, as a civilization, extraordinarily good at mopping the floor while the tap runs. What we have never properly attempted is turning off the tap.
And that's what this project is.
That is precisely what this project is. I have spent 50 years accumulating the resources to do one thing at the scale it deserves. Supply chains, energy infrastructure, medical funding. All of it has been building toward the capacity to write a check large enough that the answer to every scientific question becomes, keep going. No grant committees, no budget cycles, no politics. I am 73 years old. My body is declining in the way bodies decline, and I have no illusions about what that means. But I have something that most men in my position do not: enough money and enough clarity to do something genuinely useful with the time I have left.
The research project, anti-aging, disease prevention.
The most consequential scientific undertaking of this century, if we do it correctly. If we succeed in mapping the true mechanisms of cellular aging, not managing symptoms, but understanding the clock itself, the treatments that follow would reach hundreds of millions of people within a generation. Not the wealthy few who can afford experimental protocols today. Everyone. That is the legacy I intend to leave. Not my companies, not my portfolio. This.
He let that land for a moment before continuing.
I will not live to see the full fruits of this work. I am realistic about that. But with my resources structured correctly, this initiative runs perpetually, funded, staffed, insulated from the whims of any government or market cycle, long after I am no longer here to write the checks. What I cannot do is build it without the right people. People like Julian Osei. People like you.
The bay glittered beyond the window. The restaurant hummed with the quiet industry of expensive meals being carefully consumed. Lance looked at the man across from him. There was no sentimentality in Dorian Nouri's pitch, no appeal to emotion, no story designed to soften him up. Just the cold, irrefutable arithmetic of a very large problem and a very large checkbook. It was, Lance thought, the most honest thing a billionaire had ever said to him.
What specifically would my role be? I'm not a biologist or a physician.
No, but you understand energy, time, the relationship between the two at the quantum level. Several members of my team have read your work, your papers on temporal mechanics, your research on energy state transitions. They believe your framework has direct implications for how we understand cellular energy decay, the mitochondrial clock, as Dr. Osei calls it. You would be a collaborator. a voice in the room that none of the others can provide.
Dr. Osei. Julian Osei?
For the first time, something warmed in Nouri's expression.
You know his work.
Anyone who follows medical research knows his work.
Dr. Julian Osei was arguably the most celebrated surgeon of his generation. Trained in London and Zurich, he had pioneered techniques in reconstructive neurology that had been described, not hyperbolically, as redefining what surgery could be.
He's involved in this project?
He leads the medical team. We also have Dr. Priya Mehta. You may know her work in genetic therapy, and Dr. Soren Castillo, whose research on telomere regeneration is the most advanced currently being conducted anywhere in the world. These are not people who attach themselves to frivolous projects, Dr. Everett.
Lance was quiet for a moment. The argument Nouri had made was not designed to move him emotionally. It was designed to make him feel that declining would be the irrational choice. That a scientist who cared about science could not, in good conscience, say no to this room, and this team, and this problem. The unsettling part was that Lance couldn't immediately find the flaw in that logic.
How long? The project?
4 to 5 weeks for the initial convening. Getting the right minds together, establishing the scientific framework, aligning the research methodology. Think of it as the launch phase. The project itself is indefinite. This is not a short-term engagement. It is a permanent institution. The island facility is built to run for decades. Long after every one of us in that room is gone, the work continues. Your fiancé is welcome to visit during that time, of course. We encourage it. The people who do their best work are the ones who feel connected to their lives outside, not severed from them.
Lance almost smiled at that. He wondered whether Nouri knew that was exactly the right thing to say, or whether it was simply true.
I'll think about it.
That's all I ask. In the meantime, shall we order? I'm told the halibut here is extraordinary, though I'm afraid I've been forbidden red meat and alcohol, which removes 2 of the reasons I originally chose this restaurant.
He said this with such dry resignation that Lance found himself genuinely laughing. The halibut arrived. The conversation moved, through Dorian's early years building his first company at 26, through the infrastructure projects he was most proud of, through a dry, self-aware account of the indignities of a body that had been, as he put it, very well used. He was funny when he chose to be, curious about Lance in ways that felt genuine rather than strategic. By the time the dessert menus appeared, untouched, the bay outside had gone from hammered copper to deep violet to black. Lance shook Dorian's hand at the door, walked to his car, and sat for a moment without starting the engine. The city moved around Lance through the windshield. Headlights, pedestrians, a couple arguing quietly on the corner across the street, a man walking a dog who had stopped to investigate something on the pavement with great professional interest. All of it utterly ordinary, utterly indifferent to the dinner that had just taken place 30 floors above. Lance looked at his own hands on the steering wheel. Something was off. He turned it over in his mind the way he turned over a problem at the whiteboard, examining it from different angles, looking for the thing that didn't quite fit. Not a lie. He couldn't find a lie. Every specific claim Dorian had made was verifiable and, as far as Lance could tell, verified. The team was real. The science was real. The scale of the funding was real. And yet, a note, almost in tune. A frequency just slightly wrong, so close to right that you couldn't be certain you weren't imagining it. Lance had spent enough time in laboratories to know that the readings you trusted least were the ones that almost made sense. He drove. The city fell away behind him. The bridge appeared and he crossed it, and on the other side, the air changed the way it always did. Cooler, carrying the bay. He opened his window a few inches and let it in. He called Juliet from the car.
How was dinner?
Disarming. The man didn't appeal to my emotions, he appealed to my logic. 41 million people die of age-related disease every year, and he laid out exactly why nobody is properly attacking the root cause. Then he told me he has the money to actually fix that, and the team to do it. Dr. Julian Osei is leading the medical side.
A pause from Juliet's end of the line.
The neurosurgeon?
The same.
Okay. That's not nothing,
No, it's not nothing.
but
She knew him. She always knew when there was a but.
I don't know yet. I just don't know.
Juliet was quiet too, for a beat. The city lights blurred past the window.
Come home. We'll talk it through.
He would go in the end. 4 days of turning it over. 2 more Friday lunches with Juliet, who listened carefully and asked the questions he hadn't thought to ask himself. 1 phone call to Commander Stratford, whose measured assessment, "Sounds legitimate, Lance, but trust your gut," was both reassuring and not. And then, on a Tuesday morning, standing in his office at Stanford, with the bay visible in the distance and a coffee going cold on his desk, he picked up the phone and called Dean Ehrlich. He went because the science was real, because Julian Osai was real, because 41 million people a year was a number too large to walk away from, if there was any chance at all. And because whatever that almost out-of-tune note was, the thing he couldn't name, couldn't locate, couldn't argue himself out of, he needed, in the particular way of scientists and fools, to understand it. He would understand soon enough. The seat was cream leather, deep enough to disappear into, and the flight attendant had offered Lance a printed menu before the plane had finished taxiing. An actual menu, laminated, with a font choice that suggested someone had spent time on it. Lance looked at it for a moment, then looked out the oval window at the tarmac sliding past, and made a decision not to let any of this impress him. He lasted approximately 40 minutes before accepting the halibut. There were 4 other scientists on board. Dr. Soren Castillo, a geneticist from Amsterdam whose telomere research Lance had cited twice in the last year, who fell asleep against the window before they reached cruising altitude. A soft-spoken virologist from Seoul, whose name Lance caught and immediately lost in the general noise of boarding. And 2 biochemists from London, who spoke to each other in the compressed shorthand of a decade-long collaboration, finishing each other's sentences without noticing they were doing it. Nobody made small talk. Nobody needed to. The cabin held the focused silence of people whose minds were already at work on problems the conversation hadn't caught up to yet. Lance ordered a second sparkling water and felt, for the first time since Dean Ehrlich's call 3 weeks ago, that he was in the right room. 11 hours later, somewhere over the Pacific, where the time zones had stopped making sense, the pilot announced their descent. Lance pressed his face to the window. The island came out of the water slowly, the way a thought surfaces. First, just a suggestion of green against the blue, then a shape, then detail. A crescent of land maybe 3 miles end to end. White sand along the edges so pale it looked like the ocean had simply stopped and forgotten to cover it. The interior rising into forested hills that caught the late afternoon light and held it. Green so saturated it seemed to generate its own glow. And along the southern curve, between the tree line and the beach, a cluster of low, white buildings, arranged with the kind of unhurried precision that meant an architect had been given both a vision and enough budget to chase it. Not a laboratory, not exactly. Something that had been designed to feel like neither work nor vacation, but somehow both at once. The air hit Lance the moment he stepped off the plane. Warm, soft, carrying salt and something floral he couldn't name. The kind of air that made the body exhale without instruction. 78 degrees. A breeze from the south that moved through his shirt without effort. He stood on the tarmac for a moment longer than necessary, just breathing. Dorian was waiting at the edge of the tarmac. He was dressed simply. Linen trousers, an open-collared shirt, no jacket. And the difference from the San Francisco restaurant was immediate and complete. The careful formality was gone. Not replaced by informality exactly, but by something more truthful. The ease of a man standing on ground that belonged to him in a way that no boardroom or charity gala ever could. He looked older out here. The late afternoon sun on the tarmac was not flattering. The lines in Dorian's face were deeper here, the slight concavity below his cheekbones more visible. The hands clasped in front of him carrying the faint stiffness of joints that complained in ways they once hadn't. He was a 73-year-old man standing on a beautiful island he owned entirely, and his body was doing what 73-year-old bodies did, regardless of how much money surrounded them. But his eyes were the same as they'd been in San Francisco, entirely, uncompromisingly alert.
Dr. Everett, welcome. I hope the flight was comfortable.
Comfortable is an understatement.
Good. Come. I'll show you to your villa before the light goes. Tomorrow, the real work begins.
He turned and walked without waiting, and Lance fell into step beside him. And the island received them both with the same warm indifference it gave to everything that arrived and departed on its shores. The villa sat at the eastern edge of the complex, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, a terrace cantilevered over a small bluff with nothing between it and the horizon but 40 miles of open ocean. Lance set his bag down in the sitting room and stood very still for a moment, looking at the water. The light on it was something he didn't have language for. Not blue, exactly. Something deeper, more considered. Like the ocean had opinions about the color it wanted to be today and had chosen well. He found the landline on the desk and called Juliet before he'd even unpacked. She picked up on the second ring.
Tell me everything.
I don't know where to start. The plane had a menu, a physical, laminated menu.
You're joking.
Halibut. I had the halibut at 38,000 feet.
Lance.
The shower in this bathroom is the size of our living room. I'm not exaggerating. I measured it in footsteps.
A pause, and then her laugh. The real one. The one she couldn't quite suppress when he'd caught her off guard. The sound of it moved through him like something physical. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed to hear it until just now.
And the island?
He turned back to the window. The sun was dropping, pulling a long, slow gold across the water that darkened at the edges into something approaching violent. A bird he didn't recognize crossed the glass from left to right and disappeared into the tree line without hurry.
You should see it. I mean that, Juliet. Dorian meant it when he said you could visit. We could make a week of it, you and me, between sessions. This place it's the kind of place that makes you feel like the world is larger than you remembered.
That's either very beautiful or slightly ominous.
Definitely the first one. I haven't met the team properly yet. Tomorrow, apparently. Osei is doing a personal orientation.
You mentioned him 4 times at lunch last Friday.
Twice.
Lance. 4 times. I started counting after the second.
He laughed. Outside, the first stars were beginning to suggest themselves at the edge of the darkening sky. Faint, tentative, the way stars appeared when there was no competing light to drown them out. He had forgotten what that looked like.
Get some sleep. Go be brilliant tomorrow.
Every chance I get.
And after he hung up, he sat for a while longer with the phone in his hand, watching the stars accumulate over the ocean, and told himself the hollow feeling in his chest was just distance. Just the ordinary ache of being far from someone you loved. He told himself that, and mostly believed it. Dr. Julian Osei was waiting outside the main research building the following morning, with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a man who had been awake for some time already. He was taller than Lance had expected from photographs, lean and deliberate in his movements, the kind of physical precision that came not from vanity, but from a lifetime of work where steadiness of hand was the difference between outcomes. 51, though the photographs had suggested something older, and the reality suggested something younger. He held out a coffee without preamble.
I reread your 2019 paper last night. The section on energy state transitions in decaying quantum systems. My wife found me at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning and asked if something was wrong.
What did you tell her?
I told her something was very right. Come, we have a lot of ground to cover.
The ground, it turned out, was extraordinary. 17 laboratories. Lance counted them as Osei led him through the complex at a pace that was neither rushed nor leisurely. The pace of a man who knew where everything was and wanted you to see it in the right order. Genomics, cellular biology, regenerative medicine. In each room, researchers moved around equipment that Lance recognized as either cutting edge or, in several cases, beyond anything publicly available. Osei paused in front of a large display showing a rotating 3-dimensional model of a cell mid-division.
Before I explain what we're doing, I want to make sure you understand what I am. Most people know me as a reconstructive neurosurgeon. That's accurate as far as it goes. What it doesn't capture is that for the last 15 years, the surgery has been inseparable from the cellular science. You can't work on the neural interface between brain and body, the way the central nervous system communicates with and regulates everything below it, without understanding what's happening at this level. The cellular level, the molecular level. Surgery tells you what. Biology tells you why. I need both.
The neural interface. Is that the primary focus here?
Something crossed Osei's face. Quick, controlled, gone before Lance could read it clearly.
It's one of several. The central thesis of the project is that aging is not a disease, it's a program, one that runs whether we consent to it or not, written into the biology before any of us have a say. Every cell division, these shorten. When they're gone, the cell stops repairing itself, stops functioning as it should. Every organ in the body is running this same countdown simultaneously at slightly different rates toward the same conclusion. We are trying to understand the clock well enough to do something meaningful about it.
Reset it.
Understand it first. Resetting is a downstream question. The immune system is where I spend most of my time. It's the body's most complex network, the mechanism by which the body decides what belongs and what doesn't, what to repair and what to reject. In organ transplantation, rejection is the central problem. The body encounters something foreign and mobilizes everything it has to destroy it. Understanding why, at the molecular level, at the quantum energy level, is where your work becomes directly relevant to ours.
Lance stepped closer to the display, his eyes moving across the branching pathways.
The energy signature of the rejection response. If the immune system is making a distinction between self and non-self at the cellular level, it must be doing it through some kind of molecular recognition.
That operates on principles your quantum framework describes more precisely than anything currently in the immunological literature. Yes, exactly that.
You've been thinking about this for a while.
Since March. Since 2 in the morning and your paper. I want to understand rejection completely. Every mechanism, every variable. I want there to be no surprises. No surprises is very important to me.
The words sat in the air between them for a moment. Lance filed them away without knowing exactly where they belonged. They moved on through the spinal cord room, a space lined with anatomical models of the human spine and brainstem, rendered in a level of detail that suggested the models were not primarily for teaching.
Spinal cord regeneration. One of the last frontiers. The brain can survive extraordinary insult. The connection between brain and body is far more fragile. If we ever want to do anything truly radical in regenerative medicine, anything that operates at the level of the whole organism rather than individual cells, we have to solve this first. How to sever that connection and restore it without loss.
He said it clinically, the way a carpenter discusses a joint. Matter of fact. Technical. Lance looked at the model, at the intricate architecture of the cervical vertebrae, the delicate bundle of the cord, the point at which brain became body.
That's an extraordinarily specific problem.
The most specific problems are usually the most important ones. Come, there's someone I want you to meet.
Dr. Mara Thorne was already in the main lab when they arrived, standing at a bench with a tablet in one hand and a pipette in the other, doing two things simultaneously, in the way of people who had long ago run out of patience for doing one thing at a time. She didn't look up when they entered.
The CRISPR sequencing from Lab 4 came back. The delivery efficiency is up 14%. I told Castillo his vector was the problem, and I was right, which I am recording for posterity.
Osei introduced them with the warmth of long familiarity.
Dr. Thorne, this is Lance Everett.
She looked up. The assessment was quick and precise, the kind of evaluation that happened in a second and didn't require a second. And then she set the pipette down and extended her hand.
I've read your work.
I've read yours. The 2022 paper on CRISPR delivery mechanisms, the targeted vector approach.
The quality of her attention changed, a small but definite recalibration, like a lens sharpening.
Most physicists haven't.
Most physicists are missing something important. The cellular repair applications you outlined in Section 4
are what we're testing right now. Julian says you think like a physicist who occasionally forgets that biology has opinions.
That's fair.
Good. I prefer honest self-assessments. It saves time. Tell me what you actually understood from that paper. and what you only thought you understood. We'll work from there.
Osei caught Lance's eye over Mara's head and smiled. The smile of a man watching something he'd hoped would happen, happening. What followed was the most rigorous scientific conversation Lance had had in 2 years. Mara Thorne's knowledge of biotechnology was structural in a way that most expertise wasn't. She didn't just know what things did, she knew why they did it, at the level where the why stopped being biology and started being chemistry, and then stopped being chemistry and started being physics. She caught the places where Lance's framework broke down, called them out without ceremony, and waited while he worked through the correction in real time. She disagreed with Osei twice in the space of an hour, both times on points where Lance realized she was right. By the time the afternoon light had shifted from gold to amber, Lance had filled 11 pages of notes and felt the pleasant, specific exhaustion of a mind that had been genuinely used. He walked back to his villa alone, along a path edged with flowering plants he couldn't name, the warm evening air moving through the leaves with a sound like slow breathing. He stopped walking. The path was quiet around him. The ocean was somewhere to his left, invisible behind the tree line, making itself known through sound alone. The slow, rhythmic push and pull of water against rock that had been going on for longer than anyone on this island had been alive. Lance stood on the path and read back through his notes, slowly. Not looking for what he expected to find, but looking at what was actually there. He stopped at a phrase he had written in the spinal cord room, standing next to the anatomical models, while Osei described the mechanics of neural severance and reconnection. He had written it as a purely technical observation, descriptive rather than interpretive. At the cervical junction, the precise point where severing and reconnection would theoretically need to occur. He read it now and felt it differently. He went back further. The immune rejection research, the vascular reconnection work in the surgical wing. The two surgeons bent over their microscopes, mapping arterial pathways with the focus of people solving a problem they expected to actually encounter. Osei's quiet insistence, "No surprises," is very important to me, carrying a weight that Lance had filed away without quite knowing where to put it. And the spinal cord room, the cervical models, the point where brain became body, rendered in precise anatomical detail by someone who needed to understand it not theoretically, but practically. Lance stood on the path for a long moment without moving. The pattern was there. He could see it, or thought he could see it. Immune rejection of foreign tissue, vascular reconnection, spinal cord anatomy at the precise point of severance. All of it together in one facility, studied simultaneously. But he had been here one day of data, filtered through jet lag and first impressions, and the disorienting beauty of a place designed to make you feel at ease. He was a scientist. He knew better than to draw conclusions from a single data point, however suggestive. He told himself that. He was disciplined enough to mean it, mostly, but he also filed the pattern away, carefully, specifically, in the part of his mind where he kept things that required watching, and decided that tomorrow he would pay a different kind of attention. Then he walked back to his villa, sat on the terrace, and watched the stars come out over the water. There were more of them than he had ever seen in one place, an extravagance of them, a sky that made the version above Palo Alto feel like a rough draft. Stars accumulated so thickly at the center of the sky that the individual points blurred into something that looked almost like light. Instead, he sat with his notes in his lap and the filed-away pattern sitting quietly in the back of his mind, and told himself the honest truth. He didn't know yet. He would watch, he would wait, and he would see.